And thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be able to speak to my community, both here in the US and as well as in the Philippines and in Australia, in all of these wonderful places. As a clinical psychologist, I have my own different takes. So, we've heard about the research, we've heard about the research and direction that we want to go. And I'm going to share a little bit about my own personal experiences with psychology, being a Filipino American woman, and share a little bit about some of the experiences in terms of identity development that I experience or hear from our young adults, our college students, as well as talking about what DoFA has meant to me personally. So I'm going to, we've talked about having conversations about past, present, and future. And I forgot to start my timer there. So I thought I'd share a little bit about my past, a little bit about the present, where I see Filipino psychology going, as well as where I hope we can go with a shared future with our kababayan from the Philippines. So who am I to talk about this experience? So just a little bit of background. I'm the eldest child of Filipino immigrants. My parents came from the Philippines came to the US a few months before martial law was instigated. But for the grace of God, could have born in the Philippines, but they wanted a better life for their family. So they came here, and I was born here in Los Angeles the year is not important, a long time ago. And so I think there were a lot of pressures being the eldest child of an immigrant family. And I started reading when I was 3 years old. And so I think it got in everybody's head that, oh, I was going to be a doctor. And as I'm sharing my story, I'm sure that a lot of this will resonate with people from the Philippines, as well as people who identify as Filipino American. Lots of pressure to be a doctor from both my nuclear and extended family, all of whom are also in the Los Angeles area. So my childhood was filled with weekly birthday parties because our family was so huge that we were naturally celebrating something almost every week. But some of the challenges I had in growing up, were somewhat unique, I think. I was raised in Carson, California, which is one of the cities in Los Angeles that's very heavily populated by Filipinos, but I was not taught the language. I don't speak any Tagalog. My family speaks Chabacano and Tagalog. But I didn't speak any of it because they really wanted us to be acculturated into the US and not have any reason to not have the same opportunities as everyone else. So the most of what I knew about my culture was from food and from my family. But I think there was a lot of pressure to be successful at a very young age, to be smart, and but I'm naturally chubby. And Alicia was talking about the body shaming and the colorism, and fortunately I experienced a lot of those things at a very young age, and it led to a lot of low self-esteem problems because I felt my worth was based on a lot of things that I didn't think were important, because I was singing and was playing piano and I was getting good grades and all of those things, but for some reason my appearance was focused on. So it caused a lot of mental health concerns, but I didn't know what it was. I just thought something was wrong with me because there wasn't vocabulary or language around psychology or mental health at that time in the 70s. So I carried a lot of this with me through my life, and it showed up a lot in college when I started experiencing different, my friends, there was a lot of Filipinos in UC Irvine as well. And I started getting different experiences, positive experiences of the Philippines. And all my grooming to be a doctor changed when I went to the Philippines my last year of college, because I got to go there as a medical surgical mission practitioner. I went all over the Philippines. We were assisting in surgeries. And yet that taught me I did not want to be a doctor. And it also gave me great appreciation for, Filipinos and the values. But it really did shift my perspective and make me question my life and what I was going to do. So, fast forward to a lot of different things. This is actually my second career. I was in pharmaceutical research for the first 10 years out of college. And then I decided to go to graduate school because I had this epiphany one night of, wow, I'm so unhappy with my life. And I wish I could just help one little Filipino girl not have to go through what I went through or feel about themselves as I felt about myself at that time. And so that just became my motivation for wanting to be a psychologist. So next slide, Sheila. So the journey to being a Filipino American psychologist was also challenging because as a first generation college student, I didn't know much of what was out there. When I decided to go to graduate school, I was 10 years out of college. And so I didn't know who to turn to. I certainly couldn't talk to many people who had graduate degrees in psychology. So during my program, and, I think this was echoed with EJ and Alicia too. Like, there weren't a lot of Filipinos, and I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have any role models to look to. I didn't know how to choose graduate schools. I didn't know what was important to study. And I felt very othered. I felt very, separate. I had like two or three mixed heritage Filipinos in my cohort, but none of them embraced their Filipino heritage, and most of them identified more on their Caucasian side. So that was hard to have somebody who understood my worldview. And even when I was doing practicums and training with people, I just felt like, am I doing something wrong? Because it like my worldview was so different from most of my cohort who identified as part of the majority culture. So it wasn't until 2014 when I heard about this thing called DoFA that EJ and Kevin were starting. And the only reason I joined DoFA is because I'd heard of Kevin, who had written this book about Filipino American psychology, and I had purchased it maybe like a few months before. And I was like, ooh, I'm going to meet one. I just want to meet one Filipino psychologist. And as the organization has grown, there are, as you can see from the pictures, much more than just the one. So when I joined DoFA in 2014, I started out as the mentorship coordinator because, again, there was this feeling of, I just want to help people. I don't want people to go through the loneliness that I did. And then I became DoFA co-chair for the last 4 years until I stepped down a month ago because I was 2 years over my tenure. But what I love about DoFA is not only the research and the education and the workshops. Just for this last conference, we had we had like 40 to 50 submissions for workshops, and we just weren't able to accommodate them all. But it kept growing because I was co-chair for the last two conferences. It's like we started out with 30 for the first one, and now we had 60 for this last one. And I can't imagine where the workshops and interests will go as we keep holding these spaces. But more than anything, I'm hearing from our participants and our members, like how good it feels to have a community, because for many of them, they're like the only one. Like, I don't know where my family is. I don't know where, my kapatid are. So if anything, it just kind of gives us that validation that we're doing this work and it's important work and we can support one another too. So I think that's one of the main takeaways that I get from DoFA. And it's presented a lot of opportunities for me to speak to the community, speak at conferences. And really a lot of it is coming from this inspiration of, I know other people have this story and I want them to feel heard and I want them to feel validated. And speaking of validation, we made the move at this last conference to change our name from the Division on Filipino Americans to the Division on Filipinx Americans. And believe me, this was not an easy choice. Really the intention of it was coming from wanting to be more inclusive of our community, those who may not identify with the gender binary. But it's really interesting, and I'd love to, process this more with in our Q&A, because I'm understanding that there is a lot of feeling around the identification of Filipinx. And so it's just how do we navigate that and understanding it? For us, we felt that the majority of the members supported the inclusionary term Filipinx, and so that's what we've stuck with. But I'm open to having more conversation about it in the Q&A in a little bit. Next slide, Sheila. So one of the things that I wanted to share is it feels very full circle to be working now at the counseling center at my alma mater. Okay, I put my how many years ago, so now y'all know how old I am probably, but I didn't go to the counseling center when I was at UC Irvine. I didn't know it existed. I didn't know therapy existed. And so I think representation really makes a difference. And I would say half of my caseload is Filipinx identified, because they know that they won't have to explain their worldview and why their aunties chismes and why, their relatives call them fat and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of like an understood thing. And what's really fascinating is that many of the issues that me and my friends experienced 25 years ago are still in a way happening now. And I'd like to just highlight a few of those themes. So one of them that I hear quite a bit in the counseling center is respecting your elders, but not getting any respect back. Colonial standards of beauty. So Alicia mentioned this, like colorism, a lot of body shaming. And, body shaming, again, was kind of like my impetus for wanting support and wanting to be understood. Social conformity and peer pressure. We hear this one a lot in terms of my students being compared to their cousins, compared to other people. Didn't help that all my cousins were super skinny, so there was it was very easy to just go right there. The crab mentality, it's so interesting. I didn't know about crab mentality until Kevin Nadal's book, but it's this idea that if you're crabbing, you don't have to put the lid on, because once a crab tries to escape, all the others down below will pull them down. And I see this a lot with family members who are jealous of the student being more successful than them. And so trying to denigrate them or pull them down, as they're trying to work hard, is something that I've seen a lot. Suicidal ideation due to fears of causing shame or letting parents down. This idea of pursuing a degree that they're paying for, but the student has no interest or is really struggling. I can't tell you how many bio majors and nursing majors have come to me for therapy because they are despondent, the fact that they're failing their classes, but they can't change because this is what their parents want them to. And I get that everybody is doing the best that they can, but what's happening is we're not having these conversations that are really important to address the mental health that comes with a lot of these concerns. And then finally, people exploring their identities around religion, sexuality, political beliefs, gender identity, and fears of not being accepted by the family. So the family piece is such an important component in mental health, and this is why we need to involve the families in healing intergenerational trauma. So Sheila, next slide. So what I'm envisioning our shared future of looking like, I'm going to turn off my timer here. So I would like us to start having conversations around acculturation and Filipino values and how these impact identity development for Philams in the US, because they're not always applicable. We have Western values shoved in our faces, and we're trying to balance the old school values that our families are bringing in, but also our own unique experience of being brown in this white dominant country. Talking about mental health and decreasing the stigma around mental health, increasing communication and validation of feelings. I think if more people said, I'm sorry and I love you, it would be such a game changer in terms of Filipinx mental health. More research, of course, about how Filipinos and Filipinx Americans experience mental health in similar and different ways. So maybe some of this resonates with my colleagues in the Philippines, and maybe it doesn't. But how is it so different then, if that's the case? And then finally, healing intergenerational trauma and stopping patterns of abuse and unhealthy behaviors. I think a lot of what I experienced was part of this intergenerational trauma that had existed way before I was born. And it is, again, with my intention to not let one little Filipina girl feel like I did. I feel like I've accomplished that with this profession, as well as having the support of my DoFA family. And I don't think I would be here today in this space speaking to all of you if it wasn't for DoFA. So I'm really grateful to be here, and thank you all for listening to my story. Thanks.